As a settler in Canada, I point my research towards ways that I can hold myself accountable to the treaties that were signed that brought Canada into existence. These treaties hold us all accountable to the First Nations with whom we have signed, and they have not been upheld in practice or in spirit. My work looks to the current systems which have privileged settler and capitalist orders over Indigenous orders. Our built environment is designed with humans in mind, so I look to Indigenous food sovereignty as a possibility for the design and creation of sustainable cities. Looking to the broader systems with which we are connected shows how cities can be involved in the destruction of nature or innovations which see humanity thrive. By thrive, I do not mean continual exponential growth, but opportunities to develop meaningful relationships, engage with the world in meaningful ways, and explore our creativity. Cities have massive effects on climate change, from altering the surface albedo to removing carbon sequestering vegetation to decimating biodiversity. Cities play a large role in shaping the future of our planet. So my key questions are, can Indigenous food systems play a role in transforming and greening a prairie city? How can this be planned for in urban design? What policies need changing? I look to Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory with Canada's largest urban Indigenous population and the home of the Métis Nation, and also the city I call home, as a site for this discussion. Indigenous food sovereignty is a combination of both food sovereignty and Indigenous sovereignty, but the sum is greater than its parts. Food sovereignty came about because the relationship between food production and consumption have been destabilized by large-scale agricultural production. This industrialization, with its inherent use of fossil fuels, intensive use of the land, and massive amounts of food waste, jeopardize natural systems through encroachment on territory, loss of biodiversity, and increases in drought and extreme precipitation. Food sovereignty is a term used to characterize the struggles of the political and economic systems characterizing food production. The main goals of food sovereignty are to strengthen the social connections fostered through the production and consumption of nutritious and culturally appropriate food. Yet, food sovereignty focuses largely on agricultural production and not on the cultural and relational aspects of Indigenous food systems. While sovereignty itself is a Western term that does not lend itself readily to traditional Indigenous epistemologies, as it relates to the politics of imperial Europe, a discrete nation state and its exclusive rights over territory and populations, it has developed through social movements to incorporate ideas of self-sufficiency and autonomy. Sovereignty then can be understood as self-determination and speaks to Indigenous constitutional and treaty rights to determine their own futures and to ensure cultural continuity on their own terms. Ensuring Indigenous sovereignty rests on ensuring access to traditional territories and land. Ensuring Indigenous food sovereignty rests on ensuring that the land is cared for and that the ecosystems upon which Indigenous people and all beings rely are healthy. So I look specifically at how urban areas have utilized municipal laws to create limitations to the expression of Indigenous foodways, which are central to Indigenous political orders and the control of Indigenous bodies within urban boundaries. I explore the ways that the Indigenous food sovereignty movement can offer resistance to the neoliberal state settler capitalist regime of property and exclusion through a resurgence of traditional economies rooted in reciprocity and traditional political orders rooted in sustainable relationships with the land. Indigenous people are still seen to belong outside of the city, on reserve, and the racial logics of settler colonialism have largely kept it this way, especially through a conflation of ideas like Indigenous food sovereignty requiring large uninhabited swaths of land, as opposed to generating cities that are conducive to nature. There is a Western imaginary dichotomy of the built environment versus natural ecosystems, man versus nature, as well as rural and urban boundaries. These Western ideologies promote false dualisms in the search for easily understandable categorizations of the world and our relations with the world. Indigenous food sovereignty positions urban landscapes within their broader environment, understanding that these ecological relationships are necessary for all life. Indigenous food sovereignty already plays a large role for many Indigenous people in Winnipeg. Traditional foods or country foods, such as berries, fish, moose, deer, and bison, still form a large portion of the nutrient-dense food that urban Indigenous people have access to. Families living in the city often have relatives who live on reserve and visit and share these foods. A key point here is access. The racist ideas that many Winnipeggers have regarding Indigenous people have relegated them to the least desirable neighborhoods. Housing is out of the reach of many Indigenous people due to costs, and desirable rentals are often preferentially denied. The result is many Indigenous people living in housing that cannot adequately accommodate their family size, and it's not well cared for, and it's far from services and amenities such as groceries. This urban context has led to numerous health problems in the Indigenous community, and these poor living situations perpetuate misunderstandings and misperceptions that take an ahistorical view on why Indigenous people live in such situations. These racist perceptions do not account for the fact that Winnipeg is the traditional meeting grounds of the Cree, Nakota, Anishinaabe, and Sioux nations, who have suffered dispossession and loss of traditional territories and the decimation of numerous food sources. Kapyong Barracks is a potential site for the repatriation or rematriation of land. The land entitlement of Treaty 1 is still not fully met. This guaranteed a certain allotment of land for each family. To account for this, the government has developed a category called Treaty Land Entitlements, which provides an opportunity for First Nations to have first access to the purchase of federal surplus land within their territory. When the former Kapyong Barracks military site was sold to the Canada Lands Corporation without engaging with First Nations who had directly inquired about this site, Treaty 1 First Nations brought this treaty land entitlement to the Supreme Court of Canada, which upheld their rights. This is an extremely valuable site. It's a large site and in a location connected to numerous amenities and affluent neighborhoods. You can see in the image how large of a site this is. It is the first proposed urban residential reserve in Winnipeg, if not in Canada, as urban reserves have largely been deemed spaces for economic development and homes for businesses, not people, as Indigenous people are still seen to belong outside of the city or on reserve. The access to land in the city is minimal. Property is largely private property or commercial property, and public property and space for leisure, which is not commodified, is considered city property and is subject to its bylaws and control. People spending too long or acting in ways deemed inappropriate can be physically removed, as can so-called unwanted encroachments of nature. Yet nature runs through the city. The two powerful rivers which run through Winnipeg contain fish, which continue to provide sustenance. The trees provide syrup and medicines. The city is built on the clay ground, which give the river its color, and the city its name. Winnipeg means muddy waters. The laws within the city also discipline residential property owners regarding the appearance of their property. The City of Winnipeg Guide for the Standards of Maintenance of Residential Property states that yards and boulevards must be kept free of garbage and debris, and grass must be cut as often as needed to control weeds and ensure it is not longer than 15 centimeters or 6 inches. This privileges a certain aesthetic, one which looks controlled and ignores even the basic reproduction of grass, which needs to grow to approximately a foot to go to seed. And removal of debris, that's an important site for habitation for spring pollinators over the course of Winnipeg's harsh winters. These regulations seem minimal, but have effects on the ability of the city's nature to sustain itself without commercial intervention, such as the purchase of grass grass seed, sod, or fertilizer. And without weeds, such as dandelions, spring pollinators have little food. And without debris, pollinators have no homes. And without pollinators, flowers are not germinated and then require human intervention and labor. Imagine using paintbrushes for pollination. Alternative food practices, which food sovereignty champions, such as urban agriculture, organic food, and farmers markets, have largely been criticized by their whiteness. The idea of urban agriculture comes with ideas of raised garden beds, skillful landscaping, and maintenance and control of the site. Indigenous agricultural practices, which have existed on the land for generations, were often unrecognizable to settler colonists and often mistaken as the bounty of nature. Not understanding the ways that care and maintenance were put into these spaces. The tending of plants for sustenance did not and does not necessitate the removal of other plants from the area. Trees with bushes and fallen logs does not sound like a garden, but it can be. The trees provide fruit or sap, the bushes provide berries, and the log provides nutrients for mushrooms and fungi, which in turn provide nutrients to the surrounding plants through complex root systems. Further, planning can be changed not only to enable these messy relations to flourish, but support their development through innovative design. The new residential reserve has plans to incorporate architectural elements such as living roofs, not rooftop gardens, as seen in the image on this slide. This design not only allows for natural plants to flourish, but also helps with the quality and quantity of stormwater runoff, as well as not taking up the physical footprint of the earth, but simply elevating it. Indigenous food sovereignty can also help to generate sustainability by not only looking within, but to the city's broader connections. As food comes in from reserves, so too does the water. It arrives from an aqueduct in Shoal Lake, where there is a reservation that ironically and tragically has not had clean drinking water since the aqueduct was built and turned the reservation into an island where water has to be brought in via barge. You can explore this topic further through Adele Perry's book that is pictured here. The rivers in Winnipeg are also connected with the current industrial agricultural systems. Fields not only in southern Manitoba, but also in the United States, as rivers know no borders, are used for commercial crops and are fertilized, and runoff enters the river, which causes harm to the river ecosystem and to Lake Winnipeg, which it flows into. You can see the algae blooms washing onto the pristine sand beaches of Lake Winnipeg in the image on the right. In order to be accountable to the relationships within and outside of the city limits, policies are needed on a larger scale than just municipal, although even slight alterations of municipal bylaws can generate space for Indigenous food sovereignty to grow. That or return to Indigenous laws and governance through repatriation of land and not viewing it in settler capitalist exploitative ways. If the city of Winnipeg utilizes concepts of Indigenous food sovereignty in planning and development, it would also offer a powerful platform for accountability from the rest of the province in regards to natural ecosystems, and a strong resistance to the neoliberal capitalist order through resurgence of traditional economies. The furthering of these goals also requires further repatriation or rematriation of the land and further incorporation of nature in cityscapes. The image on the left shows the proposed design of part of the Kapyong Barracks site, with incorporation of medicinal and cultural plants and naturalized ponds. Building nature is not unheard of. Living buildings, as pictured in the middle, and land bridges pictured on the right, as well as microforests, have all been shown to have great benefits for all beings. These are not outside the realm of possibility for cities such as Winnipeg.